And we're back on Second Street here talking with Heidi MacKillop with ASN Productions. She has a new documentary out called Generation Green. Heidi, before the break, we were talking about solar power. We want to do a deep dive on this particular source of energy because that's what you do in your documentary, and just unpack the pros and the cons. Before the break, we were talking about one of the pros being with solar that you don't have the emissions with this energy source once it's up and running. What do you see as the other pros of solar power compared with other sources of energy?
Solar power energy is really interesting technology. So what is really great is the residential aspects of it. So if you want to put some solar panels on your small business or on your home, you're using the direct source of energy from your house. So it doesn't have to go travel in transmission lines, and a bunch of infrastructure doesn't need to be built for it. That is a pro in my mind that has to be really articulated to Canadians. When you start putting industrial solar and wind farms 2 hours away from city centers, or 3 or 4 or 5, you have to build those transmission lines, which are going to take that energy to where the power and electricity is needed most. And that really causes a problem between the rural and urbanization that's been happening in Canada, because the demands, as we know, are in the city centers, and there's not the same demand that is needed in the countryside.
And I'm not sure if this is something that you looked at in your documentary, but it seems like solar, there could be some benefits in, say, remote communities where it's difficult to run infrastructure out there. If I'm thinking about like a remote fly-in Aboriginal reserve where, they need energy, and running a pipeline out there with, say, natural gas could be just too cost prohibitive. Solar at least could provide some of the power some of the time. Is that something that you guys looked at?
Yes, it can be provided for some of the time. I think the challenge is, though, with solar, which is really what we focus a lot in the documentary, is the intermittency of it. Mm-hmm. Once you start looking into the overall efficiencies, say, for instance, you have a refrigerator and all you have is solar panels. You have no backup generators that will be diesel fired or some type of fossil fuel that will be your base load. What happens is say you have a bunch of food in your refrigerator at night and there's no sunlight to power your solar panels, and you don't have sufficient backup batteries in place to be able to provide that, your food will go bad. So these are kind of concepts that we really have to articulate, is that they are great technology when they're complementary with fossil fuels. They're not a great technology solely by themselves, due in part because of the battery storage issues. Now, the renewable energy movement has really focused on this and saying, well, it's going to get better. It is getting better, but we have not seen a breakthrough in this. And also on the environmental footprint, batteries do take up a lot of mining operations worldwide. And that's a huge focus in our documentary, is specifically cobalt, and which is powered for lithium-ion batteries.
Now, you did a profile of a gentleman who lived in Alberta, kind of, I'll say, out in the middle of nowhere. He was quite isolated where his house was situated. He had the solar panels on it, but how did he account for, like what you're saying, in the middle of the night when he still needs electricity, his fridge, as an example? What did his setup look like?
Yeah, so his setup, which is really interesting, is that he had 2 backup generators, basically one that would help provide more energy into his storage, into his batteries, because solely the solar panels aren't able to do that. And then he has a backup to that backup. So he really is quite self-sufficient out there, but he really focuses on this collaboration between renewables and fossil fuels. This is really the key part and the key takeaway. A lot of people are not going to like to hear this fact, but on their own, they are not sustainable long term for the energy demands that we experience here in North America, which is that we're very used to having our lights be able to turn on at any given moment. We're able to power all of our appliances 24 hours a day. So if solar and wind are only operating at 2 hours of a peak time during the day, that's wonderful. But what are you going to do with the rest of the hours in the day?
So what were his backups? You said he had like backup battery power. Where did the energy come from that? Was it stored from solar or?
So he had a little bit of storage from the solar, but mostly it was diesel backup generators that he was using just in case, because we know that that is going to 100% work. And that is something that he, in his rural, remote area, has to be able to rely on that. Because if he doesn't, then especially in the winter, that's a life or death situation for them.
Okay, of course, obviously, and here in Canada, we can have some pretty cold winters. When we come back, we'll continue chatting about solar, but also dive into wind and discuss sort of the pros and cons of that source.